The station hung in the dark like a wound that refused to heal. A broken crown of metal circling a dead moon, its lights flickering in uneven pulses as though gasping for life. Cale Torin adjusted the collar of his pressure coat, the thin polymer layers peeling from years of neglect, and stepped through the decompression gate. The air that met him was thick with heat and rust, the smell of burnt ozone and recycled sweat. Here, in the heart of the Raven's Maw market, everything had a price, and everyone was for sale. He kept his hand close to the magnetic holster at his hip, eyes scanning the crowd. Dozens of species moved in a chaotic current, insectoid couriers with translucent thoraxes, scaled traders wrapped in humid vapor suits, drones humming with counterfeit empathy chips. Cale walked with the easy gait of someone who had learned to look unimpressed by danger. He was here for one thing: cargo. The cheap, gray kind. Meat substitute harvested from gene vats in the Perseid colonies, just enough to fill his hold and keep his accounts barely above the red line. A voice hissed through the crowd. "Human. You came." Cale turned. The broker was waiting in the shadows of a half-collapsed bulkhead, its figure shrouded beneath phase cloth that shimmered like oil on water. No name, no species given, only a mask of mirrored glass that reflected Cale's tired face back at him. "You've got the protein shipment?" Cale asked. The broker's mouth, if it had one, emitted a sound like tearing silk. "Shipment, yes. Organic. Fresh. Stasis kept. Worth more than what you pay." Cale's instincts twitched. No one on the Maw ever said, "worth more," unless they were hiding rot under polish. Still, he needed the cargo. His ship's food processors had been grinding out the last of the hydrogel packs for days. "Show me." The broker led him down a narrow maintenance corridor lined with exposed conduits and leaking coolant lines. The hum of reactors vibrated underfoot like the pulse of some ancient creature. Finally, they reached a small airlock bay, sealed by triple-coated clamps. The broker's claws danced over a control pad, and the door hissed open. Cold vapor rolled out, stinging Cale's skin. Inside, 3 containment pods floated on anti-grav stabilizers. Frost clung to their edges, and the stasis lights pulsed a faint blue. Cale leaned closer, squinting through the translucent lids. 2 of the pods contained forms, not slabs of preserved meat, not animal matter, but humanoid figures. He stepped closer, his heartbeat slowing as disbelief took hold. They were girls. Or at least, something shaped like them. Their skin glowed faintly, threads of bioluminescence tracing patterns across their arms and temples. Delicate features, too perfect to be human. A faint vibration filled the chamber, like a note held just beyond hearing. Their bodies were bound by thin magnetic cuffs, faint light circling their wrists. Cale stared, then turned sharply toward the broker. "This isn't protein stock," he said. "It is flesh," the broker replied, voice flat, as if explaining to a child. "Prime grade. Unmarked. Their kind sells high in the core markets. You will make profit." Cale's stomach turned. He wasn't a moral man, he'd run contraband, lied to smugglers, skimmed from contracts, but this wasn't trade. This was rot masquerading as business. "No deal," he said, already backing away. The broker tilted its head. "You already transferred credit." Cale froze. The transaction, he'd authorized it on the outer deck, trusting the code signature. A scam. The broker chuckled, a dry static rasp. "You own them now, human. The law binds the exchange. Take your cargo and leave." The pods began to drift forward, guided by servo drones that whirred and clicked like insects. Cale swore under his breath. If he left them here, someone worse would take them. If he reported this, the Maw's enforcers would recycle him for fuel. He looked once more at the figures inside the pods, fragile, beautiful, utterly alien. One of them twitched, a flicker behind her eyelids. He made his decision in silence. "Load them on my ship," he said. Now. The broker nodded, satisfied. Wise human. You will find them, responsive. Kale didn't reply. He followed the drones back through the choking corridors until they reached Dock 12, where his ship waited, a battered freighter painted in layers of scorched silver. The Peregrine Drift. Its engines hummed weakly, hungry for parts he could no longer afford. He watched as the pods were secured in the cargo bay, the clamps sealing with a final hiss. When the broker left, Kale leaned against the bulkhead, listening to the hum of the engines. He should dump them at the next port. He should erase the transaction, pretend none of it happened. But the memory of those faint glowing lines under their skin refused to leave his mind. Hours later, as the drift detached from the maw and drifted into the void, the stars stretched out in a slow, silent wave. Kale sat in the pilot's chair, his reflection flickering across the cracked glass of the console. Then, a sound broke the silence, soft, almost human. A whisper. He turned toward the cargo bay feed. One of the pod's stasis lights had dimmed. Inside, the figure was moving. Her eyes were open, glowing like the heart of a dying star. And Kale Torin realized, with a cold certainty that settled deep in his chest, that he hadn't bought cargo at all. He had just invited something alive, something powerful, aboard his ship. The first movement of her voice came as a hum, low and almost imperceptible, vibrating through the metal floor of the cargo bay. Kale Torin froze, hand hovering over the console. His mind raced through the worst-case scenarios, alarms, security drones, consortium enforcers tracing this transaction. But none of that explained the sound that filled the room like a living pulse. One of the pod's lights flared, and the figure inside shifted, stretching with an elegance that seemed impossible for something that had been restrained for cycles. Her eyes opened. They were a luminous amber, streaked with silver, as though the light of distant stars had been captured in her iris. She blinked slowly, uncomprehending, and the magnetic cuffs that bound her wrists clattered weakly against the floor when she lifted her arms. Kale's breath caught. This was no ordinary life form, she radiated intelligence and purpose, and beneath the frail veneer of youth was the latent power of a being who had been engineered for something beyond human comprehension. You, Kale started, unsure what to say. You're free now. The second figure stirred as well. Sarah, Kale would come to know her name as he learned to speak the language hidden in their resonant hums, shifted more cautiously, observing him with wary, violet-flecked eyes. She was smaller, more delicate, but her attention was precise, measuring the space, the vibrations of the ship, the cadence of Kale's voice. Every movement suggested a mind that could calculate trajectories and energies, even while her body appeared fragile. Kale took a step closer, carefully, hands raised in a gesture of non-threat. I won't hurt you, he said, though his words felt hollow even to his own ears. I'm not going to sell you. The amber-eyed sister, Lyra, tilted her head, sensing the honesty in his voice, or perhaps reading the subtle vibrations of fear and tension in his aura. The cuffs fell away silently, drawn into hidden slots along the floor. She flexed her fingers and then, with the first deliberate motion Kale had seen, ran a hand along the nearest console, feeling the hum of the engines, the flow of the artificial gravity. Sarah, slower to move, studied him. Her voice was a resonance, vibrating in the air like a musical chord. Kale realized he could almost feel her words, a gentle pressure at the base of his skull, tingling like static. Where are we? She asked. Space, he replied simply. I'm Kale. This is my ship. He gestured vaguely at the drift of stars through the viewport. You're safe here. A pause. Lyra's eyes narrowed, not in distrust, but in calculation. Safe, she repeated, testing the word, letting it roll through the vibration of her throat. She moved closer to Sarah, who mirrored her motions, the sisters' synchronization uncanny. It was as though they had evolved together, their movements a reflection of some shared consciousness. Kale guided them toward the small hab unit. He could see the wariness in their posture, the instinctual reactions born of long captivity. Every corridor, every panel, every engine hum they passed through was studied by them as if it were alive. He realized that they weren't just observing, they were learning. Already, in the first hour, they had mapped the ship in their minds, sensing the flow of power and the latent energy of the core. By the time he reached the galley, they had begun communicating, their voices merging into harmonic tones that resonated with one another. Kale listened, fascinated and unsettled, as they exchanged information with a speed and precision that outstripped any human language. Bits of data, impressions, even faint emotional states seemed to pass between them effortlessly. He understood little of what they said, but he could feel the substance of their communication, the way their thoughts coalesced into a shared awareness. He offered them food, synthetic protein and nutrient gels, but Lyra recoiled at the texture, sniffing the air as though it offended some innate sense. Sarah, however, touched a gel pack lightly, testing it before consuming a small amount. Kale realized then that they were not mere children. They were predators of information, of environments, capable of filtering what they absorbed with surgical precision. Night cycles came and went aboard the Peregrine Drift, though in space, night was a matter of artificial lights dimming and rising. Kale found himself sleeping in short bursts, always keeping an ear tuned to the hums and whispers of the sisters. Occasionally, Lyra would stand at the viewport, staring at the endless spread of stars, and Kale would catch her lips moving in patterns that seemed like silent songs, threads of energy weaving faint pulses through the metal deck. In those first days, Kale taught them human gestures, words, and habits, how to handle tools, how to navigate corridors without tripping over low gravity, how to recognize danger in human terms. In return, they taught him the language of resonance, subtle shifts in vibration that could reveal the integrity of a hull, the direction of an approaching ship, even the presence of energy in hyperspace that the sensors could not detect. It was during one of these lessons that Kale realized the gravity of his choice. The sisters, bound now only by their trust in him, were not simply alien children he had rescued. They were living conduits of power, beings capable of bending space itself, and every decision he made from this moment on would ripple across systems he had barely touched. And yet, despite their latent strength, despite the warnings etched into every instinct of his mind, Kale felt a surge of something he had not allowed himself to feel in years: hope. As the drift carried them further from the maw, past the glowing fields of debris and the drifting corpses of derelict freighters, Lyra finally spoke in words Kale could understand. "We were never yours to sell," she said softly, but with an edge that cut through the hum of the engines. "But you chose." Sarah added a note, trembling yet firm. "You chose to keep us alive. We will remember." Kale nodded, aware that this was not a promise in the human sense, but a covenant written in resonance, in life, in the unbreakable bond that had begun to form in the silence of the void. He did not yet know the cost of that choice, nor the storms that awaited them. But as the stars stretched and the engines thrummed, he understood one immutable truth: the drift had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. Time passed in measured cycles, marked not by days or nights, but by the rhythm of the engines and the drift of stars across the viewport. Kale Torin's freighter, the Peregrine Drift, had become more than a ship. It was a moving sanctuary, a fragile world suspended between trade lanes and shadowed sectors. The sisters adapted with astonishing speed. Lyra learned to interface with the ship's core, coaxing the hum of the engines into subtle harmonics that reduced fuel consumption and optimized energy flow. Sarah spent her hours in the data banks, tapping into subspace streams, absorbing information with an intensity that made Kale's own calculations feel crude. They were not children, not pets, not simple companions. They were phenomena, alive with latent resonance that bent technology, space, and perception to their awareness. Kale watched them with a mixture of awe and unease. Every day, the lines between protector and apprentice blurred. He could teach them about the practicalities of human life, food preparation, basic maintenance, survival, but they taught him far more in return. Lyra demonstrated how to sense energy flows in the ship as if it were a living organism, her fingers tracing circuits and conduits with a precision that made sparks dance along the hull. Sarah showed him subspace frequencies hidden between the chatter of galactic comms, messages that humans had never deciphered. Together, they revealed a universe beyond Kale's comprehension, one he had only glimpsed in scattered rumors and forbidden texts. Yet not all was calm. Shadows had begun to follow them. The galactic underworld was small, and word traveled fast in whispered channels. A human had taken possession of Eleutheri, creatures that the consortium had long controlled as living keys to hyperspace navigation and military dominance. Bounty hunters and mercenary fleets lurked at the edge of known space, drawn by rumors of Kale's cargo. The first encounter was abrupt. A scout ship, sleek and black, moved through the drift lanes with predatory grace. Kale's sensors picked it up only moments before it decloaked, weapons charging, its silhouette reflected across the drift's viewport. "Alert," Kale hissed, fingers dancing over the controls. "Weapons hot, shields up." The sisters moved before he could give further orders. Lyra's hands hovered above the power grid, and a subtle vibration pulsed through the hull. The ship itself seemed to respond, diverting energy with precision beyond Kale's calculations. The enemy vessel's weapons discharged, and the shots fizzled harmlessly against a barrier of refracted energy that the sisters had orchestrated. Sarah's voice followed, a low harmonic chord. "They anticipate our moves," she said. "I can disrupt their targeting arrays." Kale barely managed to keep the ship steady as the arrays of the pursuing vessel faltered, systems sparking and groaning under the invisible interference. Within moments, the attackers retreated, leaving trails of disrupted subspace signals in their wake. Kale realized then that he was no longer commanding a ship alone. He was part of a triad of skill, intuition, and raw alien resonance that could manipulate matter and energy alike. Life settled into a tense rhythm after that skirmish. The sisters explored their environment, testing the boundaries of the ship's gravity fields, the responsiveness of the engines, even the subtle vibrations of the cargo bay. Lyra often spent hours in silent meditation, her form floating among conduits and data lines, drawing energy into patterns that flickered across her skin like living constellations. Sarah, in contrast, became an archivist, absorbing information streams, scanning distant colonies, and decoding encrypted signals with ease that bordered on precognition. Kale sometimes feared that their minds were already moving faster than his own, anticipating decisions he had yet to make. Despite their extraordinary abilities, they were not untethered from human influence. Kale's guidance grounded them in morality, in choice. He demonstrated that power was not only about control but responsibility, that the universe could be bent, but not broken. He found himself recounting stories of human history, of rebellion and compassion, of choices made in shadows that reshaped worlds. The sisters absorbed these narratives, their responses subtle, expressed in shifts of tone and vibration that revealed understanding, perhaps even judgment. Then came the first message from beyond known space, carried in encrypted subspace waves. It was a warning. The consortium had dispatched a fleet, vessels designed to hunt the Eleutheri specifically, equipped with weapons calibrated to neutralize their resonance. The message was detached, almost bureaucratic in its cruelty: retrieval of property is mandatory. Failure to comply is a crime against the state. Kale studied the words, the weight of the cosmos pressing down on him. To obey was unthinkable. To resist was to declare war on forces beyond his comprehension. He turned to the sisters, whose amber and violet eyes held no fear, only clarity. Lyra's voice vibrated through the cabin, melodic yet firm. "We will not return." Sarah added, almost as a whisper to the engines themselves, "We will defend what we choose to live for." In that moment, Kale understood that his life, his choices, and the fate of the sisters were intertwined with forces far greater than any human law. The peregrine drift was no longer a freighter, it was a vessel of rebellion, carrying within it the potential to rewrite what the galaxy considered immutable. And somewhere beyond the void, fleets were already moving, their intent unmistakable, to reclaim what had been lost and punish those who had dared to free it. Kale took a deep breath, steadying himself against the hum of the engines. He could feel the sisters' presence, their awareness coiling like energy threads through the ship, guiding, preparing, synchronizing. The drift through the void was no longer aimless, it was a journey toward inevitable confrontation. And though fear lurked at the edges of his mind, Kale could not deny the thrill that ran alongside it, the knowledge that he had chosen allies of unimaginable power, and that together, they would shape the course of worlds. The stars stretched ahead, distant yet waiting, and the peregrine drift sailed onward, carrying human and alien alike into the uncertain pulse of destiny. The void seemed heavier than usual, a tension in the pulse of space that Kale could feel through the hum of the peregrine drift. Reports had begun trickling in, fragmented and distorted, from distant colonies. Entire trade lanes shuttered, signals cut, fleets of the consortium moving like predators closing the circle. Kale stood on the bridge, his fingers brushing the cold console, sensing the subtle vibrations that Lyra and Sarah had woven into the ship's systems. Their presence was everywhere now, not just alive, but alive with purpose, threading resonance into the hull, into the engines, even into Kale himself. "Coordinates from the outer rim," Sarah said, her voice a harmonic ripple that vibrated against the walls, translating into data streams on the displays. "Pirate fleets consolidating. They've heard of us. They are organizing under driftmark symbols." Kale's eyes narrowed. Driftmark had been an idea, a symbol he had jokingly carved into the freighter's hull, a mark of defiance in the maw. He had never imagined it would become a rallying sign for outlaws, refugees, and renegades. The sisters had not asked for it, they had claimed it, weaving it into subspace communications, letting hidden networks identify them as allies, as the harbingers of a human-led rebellion. Lyra approached the helm, her hands brushing over the console. "We are stronger than they anticipate," she said softly, her voice resonating through the grav plating. "We can coordinate attacks before they know we exist. But we need more than one ship. We need a fleet." Kale swallowed. He had been a trader, a scavenger, someone who survived by moving fast and staying unseen. Now, the concept of a fleet, of open war, was being whispered to him by beings who had never known chains. He met Lyra's gaze, glowing faintly in the dim lights. "Do you think it's wise?" he asked, trying to keep his own pulse steady. Sarah, standing at the data banks, interjected. "Wisdom is subjective. Survival is objective. They will come whether we prepare or not. If we wait, they will dictate the terms. If we act, we shape them." The strategy unfolded quickly. Kale, once accustomed to solitary navigation, found himself in the heart of a web spun by alien minds. The sisters could coordinate the movements of multiple ships using frequencies humans could not detect, bending their engines and sensors into harmony. Within hours, scattered pirate groups, outcasts, and rogue AI vessels responded to their call, converging on the rendezvous coordinates. Lyra and Sarah communicated with each craft in ways that transcended language, subtle pulses, vibrations, and harmonics that ensured instantaneous alignment. Kale watched the displays in disbelief, dozens of vessels forming an armada without a single human command beyond the initial coordination. The first confrontation came over the asteroid belt of Hestara 12, a place where the consortium had hidden observation posts for centuries. The blockade was designed to crush small insurgents before they could gain traction, but Kale and the sisters had already rewritten the rules. As the lead battleship decloaked, sensors locking onto the approaching armada, Lyra's resonance rippled through the peregrine drift systems. Engines hummed in patterns that warped space slightly, sending the enemy's targeting arrays into chaos. Sarah amplified the effect, feeding the harmonic disruption into the communication links between ships. Shots misfired, missiles detonated prematurely, and shields shimmered unpredictably as though reality itself had bent in response. Kale could only watch as chaos unfolded with surgical precision. Lyra directed the armada with gestures that were almost imperceptible, her fingers tracing arcs through the air that translated into movement across the void. Sarah orchestrated defensive formations, aligning ships to create overlapping resonance fields that no conventional weapon could penetrate. The peregrine drift, once a freighter struggling for survival, now served as the nucleus of a living network, every pulse of energy orchestrated like music. And yet, amidst the triumph, Kale noticed the shadows in the sisters' expressions. Lyra's gaze was sharper now, honed on strategy, sometimes lingering on opportunities for decisive strikes. Sarah's voice carried a caution he could not ignore, a prescient undercurrent warning of the cost that lay hidden beyond the victories. He realized that power, even wielded in defense, began to shape the wielders. They were no longer merely his companions, they were commanders, architects of a rebellion he could barely comprehend. When the blockade shattered, drifting wrecks glowing against the dark, Kale allowed himself a moment to exhale. The Armada had survived, had proved their strength, and the drift mark had become a symbol in the void, a signal that a new force had emerged, one that would challenge the consortium's dominance. Lyra turned to him then, her voice soft but commanding. "This is only the beginning. They will retaliate. The consortium will marshal fleets that dwarf ours. But we will be ready. Together." Sarah placed a hand on Kale's shoulder, a gesture of connection that seemed to resonate deeper than human touch. "We fight, but we choose what we protect. We fight for life, not submission. Remember that, human." Kale nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle into him. The drift through the void had transformed into a march toward inevitable war. And while he had once believed survival was his only goal, he now understood that the stakes were far higher: freedom, power, and the fragile bonds between species, woven across circuits and subspace, would determine the shape of the galaxy itself. As the stars stretched endlessly ahead, the peregrine drift surged forward with the sisters at the helm, commanding not just ships, but destiny, in a cadence that humans were only beginning to perceive. The war had begun, and the Armada under Kale's name was no longer a collection of vessels, it was a force of legend, pulsing through the void with alien resonance, rewriting rules that had endured for centuries. The galaxy had grown restless. Across countless systems, intelligence reports flickered like nervous stars. Human and alien colonies alike whispered of the Driftmark Armada, of the freighter that had become a fortress, and of the two Eleutheri sisters whose resonance commanded fleets. Kale Torin moved through the bridge of the peregrine drift with a quiet intensity, his mind focused on the next course, the next evasive maneuvers, while Lyra and Sarah orchestrated the unseen symphony of their forces. Each ship in their network vibrated in subtle unison, engines and shields tuned to harmonic frequencies beyond human detection, a living constellation responding to invisible commands. They approached the system of Veth Prime, twin suns burning bright in the black, a system once ignored and now teetering on the edge of annihilation. Intelligence had reported the deployment of the consortium's ultimate weapon, the Ecliptic Spear, a superstructure the size of a city, its mass amplified by hyperspace resonance cores capable of collapsing entire planets into void fragments. Kale's stomach twisted at the implications. The weapon's purpose was clear: to strike at the heart of any insurrection, and to send a warning to anyone who dared harbor Eleutheri freedom. "Detection arrays confirm Spear's arrival," Sarah said, her voice a low harmonic that Kale felt in his chest as much as he heard. "Subspace readings indicate it is fully armed. Its targeting grid can override standard defenses. Engagement is suicidal." Lyra's amber eyes glimmered with a hard light. "Suicidal is irrelevant. Survival alone does not define us. We can fight. We will fight." Her fingers traced patterns across the helm's controls, sending pulses that rippled through the Armada. Kale watched the display with growing awe and fear. Dozens of vessels adjusted in synchronized choreography, forming resonant fields and attack vectors that bent light and energy in ways that should have been impossible. The first volleys erupted with the hiss of energy discharges. Kale's heart pounded as plasma bolts collided with harmonically phased shields, arcs of energy dancing across the void, painting streaks of purple and silver across the black. Every ship in the Driftmark Armada responded instantly, repositioning according to pulses emitted by the sisters. Kale felt the vibrations, the subtle ebb and flow, guiding him even as he piloted the drift through asteroid fields and subspace eddies. "Lyra, Sarah, Kale began, but both sisters spoke simultaneously, their voices harmonizing in a chord that seemed to bend gravity itself. "Focus. Flow. Control." They were no longer children he had rescued, they were commanders, entities capable of bending physics with intent. Lyra's resonance cascaded through the enemy vessels, causing engines to stutter and weapons to misfire, while Sarah threaded their harmonic manipulation into communication signals, jamming targeting systems and relaying corrections to allied vessels at speeds beyond conventional subspace limitations. The spear loomed larger in the viewport, a monolith of metallic menace. Kale realized that no mere weapon could be fought with conventional means. Its energy cores glowed like molten suns, threatening to rend space itself. The sisters exchanged a glance, subtle yet potent, their thought harmonics aligning in silent conversation. "We can redirect it," Lyra said, her voice firm but tinged with strain. "Through the network, but it will cost him." Kale understood instantly. He was the anchor, the human element in the resonance lattice. If they used him as a conduit to channel the weapon's energy through the armada, his consciousness would fracture, fused into hyperspace, a bridge between worlds he had barely begun to comprehend. He did not hesitate. There was no debate, only acceptance. "Do it," he said, his voice steady. Energy surged, raw and indescribable, coursing through every system, through every vessel, through Kale himself. The drift hummed with the sound of a million stars awakening. The spear fired, a wave of destructive resonance meant to erase entire fleets. But the sisters' manipulation, combined with Kale's willing integration, rerouted the energy into the harmonic lattice of the armada. Ships that should have been obliterated emerged intact, their shields glowing with the imprint of the human mind and the alien resonance intertwined. The ecliptic spear collapsed inward, tearing its own cores apart, scattering fragments across the void. Silence followed. The hum of the engines returned to normal, though Kale felt emptiness inside him, a lingering echo where his consciousness had touched the lattice. Lyra floated near him, her hands trembling as she traced invisible patterns across the console. You did not break," she whispered, awe and fear mingling in her tone. Sarah's violet-flecked eyes scanned the drift, calculating, analyzing, adjusting. "The cost was high. But the principle remains. Survival does not define us, choice does. And we choose life." Kale exhaled, the first full breath he had taken in cycles. His body ached, his mind still tingling from the resonance, yet he felt an unspoken bond tighten between them. This victory was not only tactical, it was symbolic. Across the galaxy, the message would spread: humans and Eleutheri could not be controlled. They could fight, and they could shape destiny. As the Driftmark Armada moved away from the remnants of the destroyed weapon, Kale looked at the sisters. They were no longer the frightened beings he had rescued years ago. Lyra's strength was tempered by purpose, Sarah's intellect by foresight, and both were bound to him in a covenant that transcended species. The galaxy had changed, and so had they. Somewhere in the dark, distant stars flickered in response, as though the universe itself acknowledged the shift. Kale understood then that his life, once driven by survival and profit, had become something greater. He was no longer merely a trader in the void. He was the anchor of a revolution, the human heart tethered to alien power, and the cost of that choice would echo across systems for centuries to come. And yet, even in the aftermath, Kale could feel the shadow of what was still to come. War was not over. It had only begun. Centuries had passed, though aboard the Peregrine drift time was always measured differently, in cycles of energy, in shifts of resonance, in the silent pulse of hyperspace. The galaxies had grown quieter, the wars of the old consortium fading into legend, replaced by systems governed not by ownership, but by choice and collaboration. Lyra and Sarah had grown beyond any classification the human mind could manage. They were no longer merely Eleutheri, nor merely siblings, nor even commanders of fleets. They were architects of law, engineers of freedom, and living conduits for a universe that had finally begun to listen. On a distant station orbiting a blue and purple gas giant, emissaries from human and alien colonies alike gathered. The Driftmark, once a symbol of rebellion and danger, had become a symbol of hope. Lyra's amber eyes scanned the room, calm and commanding, while Sarah's violet-flecked gaze calculated every nuance, every probability in real time. Across decades, they had rewritten interstellar law, banning slavery and sentient ownership, creating treaties that flowed like harmonic resonance through trade lanes and political councils. The galaxy now recognized that freedom was not optional, it was foundational. Kale Torin's name echoed in quiet reverence among the archives and histories. The human who had bought meat and instead freed gods had become myth and legend, a living memory encoded in the subspace lattice. His consciousness, fractured and fused into hyperspace during the final battle against the ecliptic spear, remained. It whispered through resonance channels, a faint guide in moments of uncertainty, the echo of a human heart that had chosen mercy over profit. Occasionally, travelers in deep space claimed they heard a voice, calm, amused, urging them to trust in life and to protect it. The sisters stood at the helm of the Drift, now a gleaming flagship in the heart of a new federation of free systems. Ships moved in perfect harmony, their engines tuned to frequencies shaped by the twins' resonance, each vessel aware of the other as if part of one mind. Lyra spoke softly, her words carrying weight beyond their syllables. The galaxy listens now. We've done what he could not. We've preserved choice, life, and consequence. Sarah touched the console, and a wave of subspace vibrations passed through the room. And yet, the story is not just ours. It is everyone's who believes freedom is worth the cost. His choice lives in all of them, in every act of defiance that does not seek vengeance but justice. A moment passed in silence, the hum of the flagship's engines resonating like the pulse of a heart that refused to die. Outside, the void stretched, infinite and still, a reminder of how fragile life was, and how powerful those who dared to protect it could become. They had survived betrayals, fleets, and weapons capable of annihilation, yet here they were, not as conquerors, but as custodians. Across the systems, old allies and new civilizations reached out. Humans who had once trafficked in greed now collaborated with elithary scientists to rebuild colonies lost to the wars of empire. Rogue AI networks, once hunted, now served as guides and archivists, storing knowledge and history in ways that no single species could monopolize. The galaxy was alive with coordination, with care, a reflection of the harmony Lyra and Sarah had fostered. The sisters finally descended into the archives of the Drift, where holographic images of Kale flickered, his youthful human face preserved in subspace memory. Lyra placed her hand on the projection. "We did it, Kale," she said, voice steady. "We protected the choice you believed in. We protected them all." Sarah joined her, and together they activated the harmonic lattice that connected every free system. The resonance carried a message, not of command or warning, but of invitation, to live, to learn, to connect, to choose. Across light years, beings paused, felt the vibrations, and understood, freedom was not a word, it was a living pulse. And in that instant, the driftmark became legend in its truest form. Not because of battles won, nor fleets commanded, nor weapons destroyed, but because a human had dared to see life in what others saw as property, and because two alien sisters had carried that choice across the stars, shaping laws, societies, and the course of the galaxy itself. For Kale, the cost had been his corporeal existence, but his consciousness remained, intertwined with the sisters, the fleet, the lattice of resonance that threaded through space. In a way only hyperspace could understand, he was everywhere and nowhere, a whisper guiding hands, a pulse reinforcing decisions, a laugh echoing across stars. The elithary sisters watched the void, twin lights gleaming like twin suns of possibility. They were no longer bound by fear or chains. They had rewritten destiny, fulfilled the covenant of choice, and honored the human who had trusted them first. In the quiet, infinite stretch of space, a faint human voice carried through subspace, gentle, amused, and warm. "Keep flying," it said. "Keep living. Keep choosing." And the galaxy listened.